Hello friends, and welcome to November 6th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and how they can engage in the process. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Outreach Director, and today's episode is being brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas. And today we're being joined by Texas Impact's Executive Director, Bee Moorhead, who is here today to talk about climate, in part because it's been in the news over the course of this week, but also because she will be leading a team of Texas Impact folks to Madrid for the United Nations Global Talks, the COP25, which will be taking place in Madrid. On Monday, the Trump administration notified the United Nations of the U.S. intention to leave the Paris Agreement. What happened? Tell us about that.
So on Monday, the Trump administration, it was the first day that given the timelines in the Paris Agreement, as you know, is the global consensus document that all the countries signed on to in 2015 to take a coordinated approach to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and reducing threats of future climate change. So in that Paris Agreement, there's a provision for countries to back out of their commitments. And the United States is the first and only country that is making that step to back away from the commitments it's made to the global community. And so Monday was the first day that the United States was able to file the paperwork signaling that it is going to leave the Paris Agreement. But we're not left yet. The story's not over yet because we don't actually leave the agreement. That we just right now have said that we plan to. The earliest date the United States could actually leave the climate agreement is November 4th of next year.
That date sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's almost the same day as, it's the day after the 2020 presidential election. So, obviously this is a very politically fraught situation, but it's also sort of ethically, morally, existentially fraught, and I'm hoping that we will talk about that.
Yeah, so number one, for those listening on podcasts, that's not thunder you're hearing, that's Bee banging her fists on the table.
Okay.
And if you don't like that sound, you can tweet at her at Bee Moorhead to let her know. So you talked about the administration taking these steps. Is there anything that Congress can do about that?
Yeah, actually, though, the first thing that people might want to know is who cares. Actually, I mean, yes, there are things Congress can do, but the American public might not care if Congress does anything about it because they might say, maybe it doesn't matter. And if you have been listening to news about this, as I know you have, you might have heard some commentary that is kind of to that effect. Well, it doesn't matter, the Paris Agreement was voluntary and all the countries are moving ahead anyway and renewable energy is doing better and better, so it's probably fine. I want to argue that that's not true.
Why should the U.S. be in it?
So I want to put forward a couple of exhibits here. I want to read a little quote to you from a piece that came out today. The quote is, "Why is the Paris Agreement so important? Climate change is a global challenge that requires a global response. Although the commitments are voluntary, the agreement sets a clear course toward a low-carbon future with nearly 200 countries, which is all of them, it's all the countries, working together and playing by the same rules. The Paris Agreement provides the context for national and global policies in areas like agriculture and energy, two things that are of interest to our own home state, which have direct implications for businesses with customers and suppliers around the world." Who do you think wrote those words? Was it some enviro? Was it some Democrat? In fact, it was the executive vice president of Walmart writing in the New York Times this morning saying Walmart and other companies are sticking with the Paris climate deal. The Trump administration's announcement this week that it would follow through with its plans to officially withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement is deeply unfortunate, says Walmart.
So Walmart is maybe more out front on climate than the United States government?
Apparently it's way farther out front, but it's not alone. Walmart is one of more than 3,800 American businesses, states, cities, and other entities that have joined together in the We Are Still In coalition. Together, these entities represent nearly 70% of the United States' gross domestic product and 2/3 of its population. If this group were a country, it would be the world's second largest economy, behind the United States as a whole, but ahead of China.
Wow.
So, Walmart has it right. The reason that it matters is this is a global problem requiring global solutions. Also out this morning is a particularly miserable piece in bioscience that you can find on Vox also. World scientists warning of a climate emergency. It's unfortunate timing that 2 days after the administration has made this clearly politically motivated move, 11,258 scientists representing 158 countries have put out a joint piece in the journal Bioscience. It says, scientists have a moral obligation to clearly warn humanity of any catastrophic event and tell it like it is. On the basis of this obligation and the graphical indicators presented below, we declare, with more than 11,000 scientist signatories from around the world, clearly and unequivocally, that the planet Earth is facing a climate emergency. So we've got, is it important? Yes, it's important. It's not just important to, environmental advocates. It's important to some of the biggest companies in the world. It's important to major population centers in the world. Our world global scientific community has an impregnable consensus that it is seriously a problem. And we have an op-ed by Noah Sachs, who is an environmental law professor who a lot of people follow, in Ecological Law Quarterly, who says the United States' behavior right now is creating a downward spiral of dissent, dysfunction, and disengagement, and that the United States may never be trusted again. Now the president has made it clear that the United States doesn't intend to act according to the Paris Agreement, and that it plans to play a spoiler role in any ongoing negotiations. The rest of the world simply won't continue ratcheting up its ambitions and taking on costs while the U.S. pursues a course of climate unilateralism. So we also get, it's really important for the United States to stay in and step up and grow up.
Well, so that's interesting because, we have faith communities, we have business leaders, we have, the academic community all thinking that something is important while the administration decides to go a different direction. In a representative democracy, it seems like Congress should have a role here, right?
You would think so, and that's why it was kind of bittersweet when I looked at my email this morning, and I had from a Democratic candidate for office here in Texas an email that said, here in Texas, it says B, here in Texas, climate change is at our front door. I saw firsthand the devastation left in the wake of Hurricane Harvey. And because of climate change, storms like Harvey are no longer once-in-a-generation events. That's why it's so disheartening that on Monday, the United States officially withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, what did I just tell you? Did we just officially withdraw from the Paris Agreement?
We started a one-year process.
We started a one-year process. And the name of this email was After Paris, What Comes Next? To current and future members of Congress, we have to say, it's not over. Don't back down. Don't fold up your tents and go home. There's a year left to get back on track, and promulgating misleading information, no matter how well-intentioned you are, isn't helping. What we know is 77% of American voters, and we know this from Anthony Lazarowitz and his amazing Yale Climate Communications Project, which Weekly Witness, if you like the great content you see here, you should totally, when this is over, you should go look at the Yale Climate Communication Project. And we can post that link.
Way to go, Yale. Free publicity from Weekly Witness. Sure, we can post that.
Sure, okay. 77% of American voters support climate action. So members of Congress do not need to worry that somehow if they talk too much about climate that they're out ahead of the voters. Voters support climate action, and Congress has to be straight and have the facts. So I would say one of the things that our members, and I know your question is what can people of faith do? One thing is make sure that your members of Congress and also state legislators who, you know, a lot of climate policy is made at the national and we know at the international level, but the Texas legislature can do a lot of things to move climate forward or not. It's important that they know the facts, and so it's important that constituents, you know, if you see information like what I just read to you from a member, whether it's somebody you like and trust or whether it's somebody that you feel like you often have some disagreement with, it's important to engage that information and make sure that you've done your part to get the facts out there.
So I know you also, there's also a link on the Texas Impact website people can use to respond.
Yeah, so what we're hoping is that people will email Congress quickly. That, I mean, this is something, yeah, we have a year to respond. I know it, I mean, it always feels like, a year, I can work on it tomorrow. No, right now, we are hoping that people will go to the Texas Impact website and click the link to send an email to their member of Congress saying, take action right now to prevent the administration from moving forward. And I know that a question is always, well, what can Congress even do to prevent the administration? Well, they could pass legislation memorializing the United States' participation in Paris. Sorry, I'm still doing that thing. They could pass legislation. Unfortunately, what we've seen is two members of the Texas congressional delegation actually are co-sponsors of a resolution that would direct the administration to get out of the Paris Agreement. So clearly those are members who definitely need to hear from constituents to get their facts in order. But one thing Congress could do is say Congress is passing legislation cementing the United States' participation in Paris. They also could take, you know, action similar to what we've talked about on immigration, that they could not fund activities that are related to leaving the agreement and other sort of moves that show how the legislative and administrative branches interact. I think the first step, though, is that members of Congress need to all get on the same page about this is not something that we want to do. We don't want to leave this agreement that all the countries are participating in, leaving ourselves as an outlier, a global pariah, making ourselves be the population of people who 100 years from now, our children and grandchildren, you know, as a new grandmother, I know what that means now.
I should have led with that. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much. We can't be the people who were responsible for the catastrophic impacts of climate, the worst climate change that we can imagine happening because the United States couldn't step up and take action and leadership.
So obviously asking Congress to act is something that we should all be doing soon, but you know, we had an election yesterday and there's another one coming, you know, 12 months from now. Is this something you would raise as a campaign issue at town hall meetings?
100%. It's something that we need to be raising constantly. And one of the most important things you know, look, this is a thing we talk about all the time. Actions that people take locally matter. They do. Whether you're, you know, changing those light bulbs, walking or riding your bike to the store this time to save on your car trip, all of those things matter. But the way what sets the framework for all the individual actions we take is policy. You and I both went to policy school. We know that that's true. It's important for people to share their experiences. You know, there's a lot of houses of worship that have put on solar panels, and that is great. And you know, it'd be great if all of them had solar panels that were good sites for solar. You know,
Right.
but it's better if you can say, we did this because we thought it was important, and we benefited from policies that helped us be able to do it, and that's why policy is so important to even the ability of individuals and local organizations to take the steps that they want to take. So it's important to talk about it at town hall meetings. It's important to go to the district office and make sure that you know those people. It's important to send the email that we put on our website, and a lot of people probably wonder, does it ever matter if you send an email to a member of Congress? We think yes, especially if a lot of people do it. So that's what we're hoping, is a lot of people will do it. The other thing I'll say is we need to be talking about it in our faith communities. And when I know you want to talk about the climate negotiations, as part of our work going to negotiations and helping other colleagues from American faith communities make sure that we're all getting information out that's good and timely to American faith communities, we will be putting together a package of worship resources. I wish that all of the houses of worship in Texas, the weekend between the 2 weeks of these negotiations, was lifting up the climate and particularly vulnerable people around the world who are already suffering from the impacts of climate change. And if we could all sort of, you know, kind of breathe in and breathe out together that weekend about this issue and our collective responsibility to take ownership and leadership.
So keep an eye on texasimpact.org and our social media for those resources and ways that you can get involved. You've mentioned the climate negotiations several times. COP25 is coming up. You're leading a team of Texas Impact folks leading the week of Thanksgiving, and that is in Madrid, which will be a surprise to some folks. So you want to talk some about why
Yeah,
it's in Madrid
it
this
is
time?
in Madrid, not Chile, as many people thought that it would be. Not the least of them being the governments of both Madrid and Chile, Spain and Chile. So, as you know, Chile is having social unrest right now. They are having, social unrest is, it's kind of like saying Hurricane Harvey was a rainstorm. They're having really massive demonstrations. Those demonstrations are not specifically about climate change per se, but they are about social inequity, they're about economic inequity, and I would suggest, are a prelude to the kind of protests that we will see around the world as impacts of climate change intensify. So I don't think that we just say, well, Chile was they couldn't quite get things together, so we decided we'd do the meeting somewhere else. I think around the world people are saying, no, we need to really take account of this, that this country wasn't able to host these talks because the impacts of inequity are catching up with them. I would suggest we live in a country that could be thinking hard about what the impacts of inequity that might catch up with us will look like.
Yeah.
But so instead, the government of Madrid, I keep saying Madrid, the government of Spain, the government of Kingdom of Spain stepped up and said we would be happy to hold the climate negotiations in Madrid. So, interestingly, and I think bears pointing out, there's been a lot of accommodation, including airlines around the world have been willing to help people change their tickets to go to Madrid instead of Chile. I mean, it's easy to say, wow, so it's a bunch of people who could afford to fly anyway, who cares? That's actually not the case. The reason that it came up was a lot of the people who were planning to go to Chile, who are now going to go to Madrid, are frontline communities, and we mean by that communities that are the most impacted by different aspects of climate change. So you think about New Orleans and Houston, that would be frontline communities, but also indigenous people in the Amazon and people from sub-Saharan Africa. And so it was people for whom traveling to a global conference was a huge undertaking. They got funding typically from somebody to do it. And the idea, I mean, the sort of the level of disappointment and despair, given all that information I just shared about the scientific information, I think would have been really high. And so it is important to thank the airlines. Yeah, of course they benefit, but they didn't have to do it that way, and it's great that they did, because now some of those most impacted people still will be able to participate. Hopefully all of them were planning to originally.
Were you surprised they didn't move it to the United States?
No, I was not surprised that they didn't move it to the United States.
Some nice hotels.
Cut it out. I was, for a minute, I thought, wouldn't it be fun if they moved it to Montreal, Canada, because that's one of the COPs was in Montreal. But no, I mean, I think generally, people are happy that it's in a Spanish-speaking country, because there is some, desire to, I think people would have been happier yet if it were still in the global south. I think that over and over again, that's a big problem, that if all the negotiations happen in the places that are the biggest producers of the emissions historically, then that doesn't look as good.
And so for folks who haven't been paying as close attention, what is the COP and what should we expect?
So the way we got the Paris Agreement is in 1992 there was the Rio Earth Summit, and the agreement that came out of that initial convening was called the United Nations Framework on Climate Change. And the nickname of that is the UNFCCC, and the framework convention means that's the framework for negotiating and talking about it in the future, right? So for all these decades, we've had, I guess that's 3 decades, we've had this framework that all the countries are using to talk about climate change, to try to negotiate collective solutions, and at different points they've had different agreements that they've come up with. So one of them that people would be likely to remember is Kyoto, the Kyoto Protocol. And the Kyoto Protocol was a treaty, and it would have had to be ratified by the US Senate. And actually, right when I first started this job was when the US Senate was considering that, and they did not end up ratifying the Kyoto Protocol. There have been other agreements, and there's a lot of subsidiary agreements to Kyoto and other major consensus documents and things that have gone forward. But in 2015, the Paris Agreement was a unique structure that didn't impose mandatory emissions reductions on anybody, but instead it's this sort of the way that we do pledge at church. Everyone says how much they can do, and then in some churches the committee comes back out and says, well, it's going to need to be more than that. Everybody says, well, I need to see if I can do a little harder. So that's kind of what the Paris Agreement is structured like, that all the countries say how much they can reduce emissions, and then the United Nations climate body, it's called the Secretariat, says, well, it's going to need to be more than that. So the Paris Agreement is a really important thing. You heard me read to you from the wise people at Walmart about how important it is.
I have a bunch of bumper sticker lines at the end of today.
Yeah. So the way the Paris Agreement was negotiated was at an annual meeting that's called the Conference of the Parties. And the parties are not political parties, they're the parties to that UNFCCC, to the original Framework Convention on Climate Change. So the United States, even if it were to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, would still be a party to that original agreement. The COP, the Conference of the Parties, has happened every year for now. This will be the 25th one. And that's a good way to think of it would be that's like the legislative session. So for people who are from Texas, at least a good way to think is the rest of the time is like the interim, when scientists are issuing reports and there's other meetings going on that are sort of setting up what the next thing's gonna be. Before the Paris Agreement, there were 2 years of negotiations with, kind of each individual country to see what would make them feel comfortable. The way that we know that, like the legislative leaders would go and talk to every member and say, would you be likely to support this if we were to put it on the floor for a vote? So the COP then is kind of that legislative session when the countries vote on stuff. So this one, it's also the way that the legislature then does due diligence on things that's already passed. That's how they're doing with agreements they've already made at the COP. So this year, the big thing is this is the last meeting kind of before the Paris Agreement kicks in and countries are supposed to say what their next round of anticipated or expected emissions reductions is, and the name of that is ambition. So the countries are supposed to ratchet up their ambition. Well, just as everybody's supposed to be getting more ambitious about reducing emissions, here comes the administration in the United States saying, never mind, we don't want to play anymore after all. So you can see how disheartening it would be. I think it's gonna, it's likely to put a little bit of a damper on some of the way the United States is perceived at the COP. Nevertheless, it's really important for American faith communities to get there and say that it doesn't represent us.
Yes, y'all will clearly be the most popular people in the room.
Thanks.
So you talked about Texas Impact and the Texas Interfaith Center's participation in that. What does that look like?
So the Texas Interfaith Center is what's called an NGO observer, so that's a non-governmental organization. So we have status as observers to the COP. So what that means is, obviously we're not negotiating, but we're a little bit, maybe is like, I don't know, I was gonna say it's maybe like being a lobbyist, but I don't think that's a fair comparison. It allows us to be more directly in the room to see what the conversations sound like. And from going to the legislature, and probably a lot of our members know, sitting in the room and hearing the people who are able to vote on policy have a conversation about their thoughts, instead of just hearing, a soundbite or their talking points when they're giving a speech or whatever. If you can really hear the conversation, and particularly hear the conversation that the diplomats are having, it really helps clarify what the issues are, and as is the case at the legislature as well, gives you sympathy for everybody's point of view, so that you're able to think a little more holistically about what does it mean for the whole world to engage in something. And so
what can we expect coming out of that?
So we'll, like in years past, we'll be putting out a lot of video from the COP. What I hope that you'll be seeing is every day, couple of video clips of what's going on and some written content. But like I said, between the 2 weeks, so the COP is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then there's a weekend in between, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and typically Friday. Friday's the day when they'll say what the decisions are or whatever the thing. In that weekend, it would be really, really helpful if U.S. faith communities could really pay some attention to this. And, kind of sit with it and think hard about what it means to talk about 1 million climate refugees, to talk about how, feet sea level rise. What does it mean to talk about whole areas of the world becoming uninhabitable? Before you even get to species loss or loss of habitat for things other than people, what is it going to mean to people who are already vulnerable? And you don't have to go all the way across the world to find people who are vulnerable to changes in climate. What's it like in Houston on a super hot day for homeless people?
Yeah.
So I hope that our American faith communities, and certainly our Texas faith communities, can put some intention into this COP. It's the 25th annual one. That seems significant, but also, especially in light of the president having taken what I think is, as much as anything, a really cowardly approach. I think, there was a member of Congress one time who said, and I'm not going to call out names, but he said, I thought climate was a problem until I heard how expensive it would be to address it. And then I thought maybe it'd be better if we say we don't believe in it after all. Because it's just too hard to think about what you would do. Every year that we don't do something pretty significant, it makes the thing we need to do next year more significant. So it would be good if we could all kind of get our heads on straight about it.
And do something. So anything else COP related that we need to make sure we hit?
Just go do those district visits now and tell your members. I think, Scott, I think it's the same thing as with immigration. And those two things are really closely linked, so that's, handy, I guess. It is just not acceptable for someone to say, we can't do anything about fill in the blank issue till after the next election. Elections are about whether we like how things are going or whether we want to see a change. That's part of the point of elections. So if your position as an elected official is, I'm not going to do anything till after the election because if you don't like what I do, then you might not vote for me. That's robbing the voters of their opportunity to make an informed decision. But obviously more than that, people don't have time. We don't have time. We don't have time for the political calculus. And I understand that there are politicians who would say, we don't have time to not do the political calculus. We've had time to do the political calculus. We've had about half a century to do the political calculus. Now we need to actually just do what's the right thing for our own future generations and other people's children and grandchildren.
Also, you do hear that from Congress a lot, right? Like, we're going to wait till after the next election, but the community elects these folks for a 2-year or 6-year period of time, and we're not even halfway through that term yet. So,
That's right. That's exactly right. We have, just to give an example of somebody who, I don't think we have any particular beef with, Will Hurd has already announced he's not running again. Well, he's still got, more than half of his term to go. So that means, I'm not suggesting that particular member needs to be the one to do the thing, but I'm just saying, that's a good example of somebody who, if you say, oh, well, there's no point talking to him now because he said he was retiring.
14 of your 24-month term.
Yeah, I guess my immediate household metaphor that came to me was like throwing away the toothpaste when the tube's still halfway full.
Yeah. All right, so usually when we have special guests, I give them a chance to shamelessly plug something, but I guess this is just our chance to promote some upcoming Texas Impact opportunities. So anything in particular you want to highlight?
Well, I definitely want to highlight that we're having 2 events next weekend.
2 events next weekend,
that's right. We have the Advocacy 101 program that we're doing first in Elgin at St. Peter's Lutheran Church.
On November 16th from 10 to 12.
From 10 to 12. And on Sunday, November 17th from 2 to 5 at First Unitarian Church in San Antonio, we're having that same event, so a little bit longer in the afternoon on Sunday. I really hope people will come out. One of the things we're going to focus on is, it's easy for us to say, you should go talk to your member of Congress or your legislator in their district office. I can't necessarily always tell you where the district office is for my member of Congress, and I'm sure other people can either. You gotta be intentional about it, right? So we're gonna talk about how do you develop an intentional district visit strategy, and I think that's really important right now.
So if you're in or around San Antonio or Elgin, or know somebody in or around San Antonio or Elgin, we hope to see you there. We hope you'll invite your friends. Also, if you're listening to this on podcast, if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can find the podcast by searching for Texas Impact Weekly Witness and your favorite podcast app. But you might have noticed a new series.
Oh, our new podcast series. Yes, we're so excited about it. Reimagining Justice. It is a special 10-part series on an issue that's actually very near and dear to my heart: health equity and social determinants of health. And we all started hearing about social determinants of health 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and since then they have become more and more the framework for how all of us are talking about health policy. And I like your Cliff Notes, actually, the very best thing, your tagline about social determinants of health. If you think that someone's health should be determined by their genetic code more than their zip code, then you have identified how social determinants impact people's health.
All right, so make sure to check that out, share that content with your friends. Also, you're a new grandmother. I know you mentioned that.
Yeah, and I think I have to keep it a little bit mum because I forgot I'm not supposed to talk about it on social media. So
excellent. Well, we'll forget about that.
But
hey, thanks so much for tuning in. I know you're going to be sharing a bunch of content from the COP on your personal Twitter feed, which is...
My personal Twitter feed is Bee Moorhead at Bee Moorhead,
okay.
Right? That's right.
That
But we will set up some special COP hashtags, and I think we have actually an @Twitter account for the COP. So this is the fifth time Texas Impact will have been at the COP. So we kind of got some of it down.
Follow Texas Impact on social media, and we'll make sure we get all that information out to you. Hey, Bee, thanks for the time today. This was fun.
Well, it was fun. Thanks for having me.
So that does it for this week. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Please make sure to rate and review the podcast, share this content with your friends, family, and congregations. We have a lot coming up in the next couple of months and then next year, so continue to help us build this Weekly Witness family and this movement moving forward. And if you've made it this far in the podcast, we hope that you enjoy the content and become a member by going to texasimpact.org/join. Friends, thanks a lot for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Until then, let's get to work.